Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and beat them for your entertainment. This particular story is called His Name Was Martin, written by FarmWitch4275. Just be aware that this is a very dark story. If you do not like gratuitous violence, then this one may not be for you. Anyways, on to the story. The halls of the accursed place rang with naught but the horrified screams of certain people in cells. Only one such cell remained silent. Within its black, painted, featureless metal walls lies tied two men. One such is a Rantharian, as humans describe them, blood elves. The other, sitting quietly in the chair opposite him, is a human male, 50 years of age, silently smoking a cigar.
"What are you doing here, human? We've been here for an hour. I am not telling you anything,"
the elf defiantly yelled out. The human remained silent.
"My brethren will be here. Our fleet is 10 times the strength of yours, and our armies are more so. You stand no chance."
The human smiled in a way that made the elf even more uncomfortable than he already was.
"You smile now, human, but we will glass your planet. You will make fine slaves for our empire. I'm thinking maybe you'll make a nice footstool."
The elf laughed defiantly. The human silently just dragged on his cigar, the pale light from the fabric and leaf stick glowing brightly with every breath.
"Do you know who I am? I am Grand Admiral Altharius Chant of the Third Fleet. My men will not rest until I am back in their command again. You have no idea what your pitiful race has done to themselves."
Altharius let out another mocking laugh. The human simply smiled again, dragging on his cigar. He moved from his seat and moved to Hollywood's screen with him, aiming it at the Admiral.
"Now, please, human, we learned long ago that your offers of friendship were lies. The Kadathari already told us about this."
Altharius scoffed. The holovision screen turned on and showed a human fleet, aimed at the Kadathari home world. There were thousands of ships, some of which were 5 times the size of the Empire's flagship.
"Big deal. They have a fleet 5 times your size. Size is meaningless if you..."
His boasting was cut short by the video continuing, showing the Kadathari navy being systematically wiped out. 10 minutes of this followed, and soon the battle was over with humanity facing only marginal losses. The human chuckled somewhat sadistically and picked up a tool. Betsy, an old-fashioned pipe wrench. Your General Tharentus is quite familiar with this. It took him 2 days of beating to finally die." The human started a new video clip, showing the best highlights of the Blood Elf General being beaten with a pipe wrench to the delight of several humans and a few other aliens. The Admiral was forced to watch his old comrade being mercilessly bashed into a spotty pulp. The humans weren't asking him any questions, they were just hurting him. He was quite talkative too. After I collapsed his kneecaps, he gave us a lot of info, the human said, polishing the implement. The video continued, showing parts where the general began to enact what was considered treason. He was given away troop movements, ship locations, locations of observation outposts, and access codes to dreadnought systems. The humans ignored him and simply just resumed bashing him. By the end of the video, the general is begging them to stop, tears and blood streaming down his face as he desperately bargains for his life. One human pulls out an assault rifle, closes the distance, and empties the entire clip straight into the general's face. The video cuts off, and Altharius tilts his head to the side, voiding the meager contents of his stomach, and the human approaches him.
"Barbarians!"
he screams out. What? What was that? You say something? The human said, grabbing the Admiral's head and twisting it to look him in the eye.
"You absolute animals! He surrendered. You have no honor!"
the Admiral screamed out in defiance. The human was not impressed and lifted back, then, with as much strength as he could muster, brought the pipe down on the Admiral's kneecap. The Admiral let out an almighty shriek of agony as several bones shattered all at once. The human stood up, simply listening to the Admiral screaming for a few minutes. The Agro was now shaking, the pain almost too much for him to bear. The Admiral finally looked at the human, eyes full of terror and tears. The human simply ignored him, moving the screen in front of him again and showing him a new video. The human used a small handkerchief to wipe the Admiral's eyes so that he could watch. The video played, and the whole miserable 30 minutes showed a human fleet decimate the Empire's naval forces, followed by a precision orbital bombardment. The video switched between recordings of palaces and libraries being incinerated by orbital strikes and images of Imperial warships being torn to pieces by absurd quantities of cannon fire. The video continues as the human warship fleet went into orbit and began obliterating everything on the planet's surface except the planets. The human paused the video. The Kandathari are just as useless as you were. Very impolite, sadistic, selfish, stupid. They lied about us to get you to attack us. We found out about it, of course. They aren't exactly good liars. They had no concept of our military strength. That's why they're all dead now. And also, why your leaders are dead too. The human resumed the video and skipped ahead. Oh, this is my favorite part, he said excitedly. The video came to show all of the 35 members of the Grand Council tied to metal poles in the streets, each one beaten and broken. Under each man was an open barrel full of a strange black liquid in which their feet were submerged. One by one, each barrel was lit on fire. The Admiral watched in horror, beginning to dry heave in sickness as he watched his entire leadership being burned alive to a cheering crowd of invaders with a backdrop of a burning city. The human finished the video after each was pronounced extra crispy and set the screen aside. Why do you do this? The Admiral begged. His confidence was shattered. He was at this human's mercy, and this human had none to give. My name is Reginald James Smythe. You were there when you attacked our colony on New Eden. You captured human survivors from your attack and began to interrogate them, he said, standing once again, brandishing his wrench. So, you would do the same. Your military forces were pathetic and barely held an hour against our armada. The Admiral lashed back. You took unarmed civilians, not military personnel. What you destroyed in the initial attack was little more than a local security force, all of whom were killed. Your prisoners were unarmed civilians and surviving security, Reginald said calmly as he moved around the Admiral. It matters not. Any who stand against the Imperium suffer the same fate. The Admiral was defiant, a shred of his dignity still intact despite the devastation. When you were unable to get any information on our troop movements or state of military from our citizens, who were only unarmed civilians with no bearing on our actions beyond their homes, you began to torture them for information, Reginald said, enticingly brandishing the tool. So what? You are doing that to me right now. I will still tell you nothing. Do you remember any small humans there with you? I know you do, Reginald asked, his tone of voice flat and monotone. Of course, the Admiral scoffed. It was pathetic, honestly. I don't know why you even kept them. Were they pets or something? The babbling and screeching wasn't even entertaining. We were wondering what you kept them around for as we finished off the last one. Reginald lost it and bashed the Admiral 2 times, shattering his right kneecap and nearly removing his right arm from its socket. The Admiral screamed for a few minutes with Reginald patiently waiting, the expression on his face a mixture of pure, unadulterated hatred, sadness, and joy. Hatred for the individual in front of him, sadness for what he heard, and joy for the sound of his screaming. Reginald grabbed the Admiral's head and made him look in his eyes. His name was Martin. He was the last one you interrogated before our fleets ambushed you and captured your men. Reginald used the palm of his hand and slapped the Admiral 12 times. What use are those dwarves, anyway? We do not have dwarves, you stupid sub-sapient piece of shit. They are called children. Reginald lost it and hit the Admiral's right arm so hard it popped out of its socket completely and just hung there, barely keeping together. The Admiral's screams were muffled as Reginald put several rolls of duct tape over his mouth. My son was there. He was 7 years old. His name was Martin. Reginald began to mercilessly pummel the Admiral to literal pieces, with each hit screaming out, His name was Martin, as he landed each blow. 2 weeks after this, 7 empires were reduced to ashes. A further 10 more were wiped out completely. Humanity decided from this point on a policy of isolation and self-preservation, refusing trade or negotiations with anyone and keeping to themselves. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.